from a management and leadership standpoint, Dennis Muhlenberg, CEO, stripped of his chairmanship last week. But in general, when you look at the steps the board is taking, has it been enough?
Yeah, I think the board has done the right thing. There's no time to celebrate with 350 fiery deaths of innocent civilians. It's a horrible situation. I think the public was looking for perhaps more public commentary, but the leadership was held back pending the safety review by these international authorities. They weren't allowed to speak out beforehand. And of course, there's this Department of Justice investigation taking place, which they couldn't comment on in terms of this odd communication from a test pilot that came out on Friday, certainly threw quite a wrench into markets.
Yeah, and Bill, I mean, we had the survey that was released from a couple years ago as well, showing that there seems to have been a push, or at least a third of employees that were surveyed seem to have felt pushed to produce and maybe potentially put some of those safety steps into question. I'm going to put the same question to you. Do you think the board is doing enough?
I think they have stepped up in recent months, and I think what's most important is this safety committee that Admiral Giambastiani is going to chair. They have an outstanding board. This is where a board has to step up. I faced similar things in my career at Goldman, and we did with the Medtronic board. So the board has to step up. But I think the most important thing now is ensuring the safety of Boeing aircraft. And that's going to require a complete top-to-bottom review by the management, overseen by the board, very similar to what we've done at other companies, and getting the MAX approved for flying, working with the FAA to get it approved for flying. Until that happens, there's going to be lots of questions coming up. By the way, there's always pressure in companies, but it can never sacrifice safety or quality. At Medtronic, there's pressure to do a good job, to serve patients, but you can never sacrifice it. So it's the same thing here. Boeing has to be known as producing the safest aircraft made ever, and they have to do that, and that's going to require a top-to-bottom review of all their procedures and make sure that they're right.
Bill, Jeffrey, a board's role, certainly one of the most important ones, is also to be ready to potentially have a successor and think about whether or not the tenure of the current CEO is deserving of continuation. Shouldn't the board at least be considering that here? Shouldn't they be delving into exactly who is responsible for what certainly has been one of the worst missteps this company has ever seen?
It's absolutely one of the most unfortunate periods in the history of the company. But there have been periods in the history of the company where there was actual misconduct. In Richard Sears' day and Phil Condit's day. That's not what's happening in this case. There's no evidence that surfaced of any deceit or any misconduct. But certainly it's not a happy moment. I hate to agree with Bill George, my Harvard friend, but he happens to be right again on this one. The board has done the right thing to put together a safety committee, but also to centralize engineering as they did, instead of being diluted out through the company.
But Jeff, doesn't somebody have to take responsibility? It may not be misconduct, but it's a screw-up of pretty significant proportions.
Well, you got 900 vendors, and there is something that Rockwell Collins did that was not transparent to anybody. I don't think he holds somebody responsible inside Boeing for them having combined some indicators where one of those indicators would have been on the instrument panel. The other one would never have been unless you're military aircraft. They didn't know that was combined, and that wasn't put on, and that still wouldn't have prevented this disaster. But there were some little things like that. And also they've learned a lot just about the MCAS system, what they didn't anticipate, frankly. This will be controversial to say because I'm not blaming the victim, but we have a lot of newer, younger pilots, 23-year-old pilots with 26-year-old captains, because of a pilot shortage around the world. Is something they haven't anticipated. So with all the buzzing and alarms going off, they have to anticipate that this MCAS system, which is the autopilot system, that it reverts every 7 seconds, is now not going to take control away from the pilot as frequently. So the software fixes make good sense. And I also think separating the roles makes sense. In an unhappy period in the building we're in right now, they had a separation of roles, as you remember, at one point, and they had to regain confidence that way. David Calhoun as a chairman, and by the way, I think Bill George and I agree, and maybe you agree, it's not a panacea, separation of roles, but in some cases, at a time of crisis, it's somebody who can focus on the regulatory issues. We've seen it done well at Citigroup. We've seen it well done at Raytheon. You separate the roles so the chairman can deal with regulatory issues and the CEO can run the company. I think that's been pretty effective.
Bill, just shifting gears here, because The other company that is continuing to be under pressure right now because of its own issues is Johnson and Johnson. You had these tiny trace amounts of asbestos found in baby powder, one sample, I realize. But after years of the company coming out and citing studies and saying asbestos is nowhere to be found near its baby powder, how do you think that company now needs to respond? And what's the brand impact? Because that seems like the biggest potential longer-term issue here.
Yeah, J&J is being hit by a whole series of plaintiffs' attorney suits, and they're coming after them. I don't think there's any causality that's been demonstrated between these problems, but certainly this is an embarrassing moment, and any trace indications asbestos have caused a great concern. It was one lot, 33,000 bottles have been recalled, but they have to make absolutely certain that their production process is 100% pure. I don't think that indicates everything else in baby powder is unsafe, although it's a whole different situation. They've just made a major settlement in the opioids. I think everyone in opioids now is getting hit and kind of forced to a settlement situation. But they're being hit from all sides, and I think it's a very serious situation. Again, the board's got to step up, work with Alex Gorski to get these plaintiff suits settled and behind them. And the question here, it's the same at Boeing. You're challenging the integrity of Boeing, of J&J science. And Boeing has got to stand behind that and say, we are going to ensure that our science is perfect, just like you're challenging the integrity of Boeing's safety commitment. I think both companies are committed to the highest values of integrity and safety.